At Kingsley Prep, reputation walks faster than truth. So when a quiet 9-year-old black boy stood up in class and said his father worked at the Pentagon, they laughed. His teachers smirked. His classmates whispered. And by the end of the day, Noah Bennett wasn't just dismissed, he was erased. But 5 days later, that same boy would be at the center of a federal counterintelligence operation. Because the man they thought was a janitor, the man they said couldn't possibly matter, was one of the most strategic minds safeguarding this nation's secrets. And someone had just tried to kidnap his son. It's about what happens when the truth walks back through the door. Wearing a badge no one was ready to see. At 9 years old, Noah Bennett had already learned that truth doesn't always walk into this isn't just a story about bias, room, and get believed, especially when it's wearing the wrong skin, the wrong shoes, or the wrong last name. Every morning, Kingsley Preparatory School greeted him like it tolerated his presence more than it welcomed it. The polished stone hallways, the engraved plaques of legacy families, the sea of pressed uniforms and polished loafers, it was a place where wealth wasn't whispered about. It was assumed. Noah didn't come from legacy. He came from silence, from careful answers at parent socials, from a father who was always working late but never said where. And today was presentation day. The assignment was simple. Talk about your parents' jobs. But in a school like Kingsley, simple didn't mean easy. It meant lined up for judgment. Ms. Langford, a woman whose heels clicked with authority and whose smile never quite reached her eyes, stood at the front of the room, perfectly poised. Her clipboard rested like a gavel in her hand. "Bennett," she said. Noah rose. His knees felt like rubber, but he walked forward anyway, one hand brushing nervously across the crease in his uniform. "My name is Noah Bennett," he began, "and my father works at the Pentagon." The room didn't laugh at first. It paused. Then Tyler Greaves scoffed from the second row. "What's he do there, clean the windows?" Laughter rippled through the room like a fire catching paper. Some students tried to hide their amusement. Others didn't bother. Noah looked to Ms. Langford. She didn't silence them. Instead, she arched a brow. "The Pentagon, Mr. Bennett?" Her voice was syrupy sweet and twice as sharp. "And what exactly does your father do there? Run the Joint Chiefs?" Noah blinked. "He works in security operations," he said carefully. "Oh, I'm sure he does," she said, smiling as if she were in on a private joke. "Well, thank you for that imaginative contribution. You may sit." Noah returned to his seat. But his dignity didn't come with him. The whispers behind his back were louder now. One classmate mimed saluting. Another whispered, "More like janitor." The bell rang, but Noah didn't move. He stayed in his seat until the room emptied, only then collecting his bag and walking slowly to the school gate where his father waited. Derek Bennett looked, as always, like just another government worker, modest polo shirt, quiet posture, eyes that had seen more than he ever said. Noah climbed into this car and stared straight ahead. "Something happen?" Derek asked without turning. Noah didn't speak for a long moment. Then, in a voice almost too soft to hear, "They laughed when I told them where you work." Derek glanced at him, then back to the road. "And what did you say?" "I told them the truth," Noah said. "They called me a liar, even my teacher." There was a pause. Then Derek nodded. "That's the thing about the truth, Noah. Sometimes it has to wait for people to catch up to it." The next day, Ms. Langford pulled Noah aside after class. "If your father really works at the Pentagon," she said, eyes narrowing, "perhaps he can come on Parents' Day next week and clear things up." Noah looked up at her. Something in him hardened. "He'll be there," he said, steady now. And in that moment, Ms. Langford, the woman who wore doubt like a pearl necklace, hesitated, because something about the way he said it sounded less like a promise and more like a warning. The morning after the classroom humiliation, Noah Bennett sat at the kitchen table, mechanically spooning cereal into his mouth as the kitchen TV hummed softly in the background. His father sat across from him, reading from a tablet, not news or weather, but something encrypted and government-stamped. Noah studied him. Derek Bennett was the kind of man who moved without wasted motion. His voice was never loud, his smile never showy. But beneath the calm was something else, something quiet and razor-sharp. Noah had seen glimpses of it before, how his father scanned a room in seconds, how he always knew when someone was behind them, how even their old sedan had better security than most armored vans. He just hadn't known what to call it until yesterday. Now questions bubbled in Noah's mind. "Dad," he asked, trying to sound casual, "you've really worked at the Pentagon this whole time?" Derek didn't look up from the tablet. "I have." "Then why don't you ever come to school stuff? You missed the science fair and last year's concert." There was a pause, a longer one than usual. "I've told you," Derek replied, eyes still on the screen. "My work isn't always easy to step away from." Noah didn't push further, but the seed had already taken root. Later that day, while his father took a phone call in the study, Noah stood in the hallway, half hidden by the doorframe. He didn't understand every word, but the tone was unmistakable, measured urgency layered over tactical precision. "No, that's not a minor breach. Kingsley Preparatory has elevated protocols for a reason," Derek was saying. "If it triggered my clearance filters, it wasn't a glitch. It was a probe." A pause. "Understood. I'll handle it personally." The call ended. Silence followed. Noah quietly stepped back and returned to the living room before his father emerged, face now unreadable. "Homework done?" he asked, like nothing had happened. "Almost," Noah replied, watching him carefully. That night, as Noah brushed his teeth, he caught sight of something through the second-story window. Parked across the street, half shrouded in shadow, was a black SUV, engine running. Again. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed it. It had been there once last week. Another time the month before. Different plates, same model, same stillness. He padded down the hall. "Dad," he said softly, "there's a car watching our house." Derek appeared behind him almost instantly, looked out the window without blinking. No surprise, no panic, just a quiet sigh. "Go to bed, son." "But—" "Trust me," Derek said, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Some things are safer if you don't know." Noah didn't sleep well that night. But in the morning, as he came down to the kitchen, he noticed something had shifted. His father, who usually left before sunrise, was still there. Still in a sharp, dark suit. Not business casual, not low profile. Prepared. On the counter sat a leather portfolio, a different ID badge clipped to the strap. The emblem stamped on it wasn't the regular federal seal Noah had seen before. It was more specialized, more secure. Derek noticed him staring. "Parents' Day is Friday, right?" he asked. Noah nodded. "You're really coming?" Derek smiled faintly. "I told you I would." Outside, the black SUV was gone, but inside the house, tension coiled like a held breath, because Kingsley Prep had mocked a quiet boy for speaking the truth. And now, the man they dismissed as invisible was preparing to walk through their door, not as a janitor, not as a background father, but as the one man in the room with the clearance to make the whole building stop breathing. Parents' Day at Kingsley Preparatory School had always been more than just a meet and greet. It was a quiet pageant of prestige. Fathers in tailored suits shook hands like diplomats. Mothers with law degrees and foundations stood near the art displays, casually name-dropping senators and tech giants. Students, trained by their environments, watched it all like it was normal. But this year something unexpected entered the room. He walked in just before second period. Noah Bennett, dark suit, polished shoes, posture like a man who'd stood before presidents and never once bent his spine. At his side, Noah walked in silence, trying to hide the swirl of emotions tightening in his chest. But he didn't need to say a word. His father's presence said everything for him. At the front of the classroom, Ms. Langford looked up from her attendance clipboard. Her smile faltered. For a half-second, she stared, processing what she saw and what she had assumed. The man before her wasn't the invisible government paper pusher she had imagined. He wasn't lost in the crowd of parents who'd arrived in European cars and silk ties. No, this was different. Because clipped to Derek's jacket, neat, deliberate, impossible to ignore, was a Pentagon-issued federal clearance badge, its insignia glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. "Ms. Langford," Noah said, his voice calm but unmistakably proud. "This is my dad." Derek extended a hand. "It's good to meet you. I've heard quite a bit." "Welcome, Mr. Bennett," she said, recovering her smile, though it arrived a few seconds too late. "We're very glad you could join us." A few parents had turned to look, a few more whispered. The badge did most of the talking. Noah took his seat. For once, he didn't slouch. He didn't shrink. He simply sat tall in his chair like the weight he'd been carrying all week had lifted itself off his back. The lesson began. "Ms. Langford pressed on, pretending nothing had changed. She walked the room, guiding discussion, calling on students to share what they'd learned about civic engagement. But her voice didn't land with quite the same sharpness, and her eyes kept flicking unintentionally, nervously toward the back of the room, where Derek stood with arms folded and eyes sharp. Then it happened. The classroom door opened softly. A man in a gray suit stepped inside, his expression neutral but focused. He walked past the line of seated parents and leaned in close to Derek, whispering something too low to catch. But Noah saw it, the flicker in his father's expression, the tightening of his jaw, the way his shoulders squared just a little more. Derek gave a small nod, then turned to Ms. Langford. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone polite but unmistakably firm. "Something's come up. I'll need to step out." "Of course," she stammered. But before he left, Derek turned toward the class. He looked at Noah, then slowly at the rows of students and parents now watching him with silent curiosity. "I hope you've all had a meaningful morning," he said. "And for what it's worth," he tapped the badge on his chest with 2 fingers, "your classmate wasn't lying." He gave a small nod to Ms. Langford and walked out of the room, his exit as quiet and deliberate as his entrance. But what remained was louder than anything he'd said. Because for the first time since Noah stood at the front of that classroom, claiming a truth no one wanted to hear, silence meant respect. And every whispered doubt had just been buried beneath the weight of one man's calm authority. The moment Derek Bennett stepped out of room 204, everything shifted. At first it was subtle. The buzz of classroom chatter continued, the rustle of papers and nervous parents playing at normalcy. But beneath it all was a silence, low, humming, tense, like the school itself had inhaled and was holding its breath. In the front office, the receptionist looked up just in time to see 3 unmarked black SUVs roll into the parking lot. Men and women in dark suits exited quickly, moving with sharp precision and purpose. Not one of them wore a name tag. By the time they reached the main doors, the lead agent had already flashed her credentials: FBI, Counterintelligence Division. Immediate clearance. The secretary barely had time to speak before the announcement blared over the intercom. "Attention all staff and students. As a precaution, Kingsley Preparatory is entering a soft lockdown. Please remain in your current classrooms. This is not a drill." Gasps, whispers. Chairs scraped the floor. In Ms. Langford's classroom, parents exchanged uneasy glances. Students looked around, unsure whether to laugh it off or be afraid. Only Noah didn't move, because he had seen the way his father's shoulders had shifted just before stepping out. He knew the look in Derek's eyes. He had seen it once before when a stranger had followed them too closely through a shopping mall in Virginia, and his father had gone from dad to something else. Ms. Langford's voice trembled slightly as she moved to the blinds, pulling them closed. "Everyone, let's just stay calm. This is likely a false alarm." But calm was not what the hallway held. Down the East Wing corridor, a janitor's closet was opened by a federal tech agent. Inside, beneath a false ceiling tile, was a black device no bigger than a paperback. It blinked silently, pulsing red. A signal recorder. 2 more were found. One beneath the main server cabinet. Another in room 204, tucked discreetly behind a ceiling vent. Ms. Langford's classroom had been under surveillance for weeks. At the same time, one of the cafeteria custodians, a man who'd worked at the school for less than a month, was intercepted trying to exit the back kitchen door. He didn't get far. The badge clipped to his shirt had been forged. The utility cart he was pushing held more than cleaning supplies. Beneath the false bottom, a hard drive, zip ties, and something far more chilling, a syringe. Inside the classroom, tension escalated. Ms. Langford's confident facade had faded entirely. She paced. Her voice cracked as she attempted to reassure parents who were now checking their phones, reading real-time news of an incident at a D.C. private school. Then the door opened again, and Derek stepped back in, not with uncertainty, but with authority. Behind him stood an FBI field agent who nodded to Ms. Langford and then began a quiet sweep of the room. The agent's scanner blinked twice and beeped. He reached toward the back wall, removed a ceiling tile, and pulled out another hidden device. The room froze. Noah didn't blink. Ms. Langford could barely speak. "Everyone needs to stay exactly where they are," Derek said, his voice even but commanding. "This is part of an ongoing federal operation. You are safe, but I need your cooperation." No one argued, because whatever authority Ms. Langford once commanded in this room had now shifted entirely. Parents who once traded smug glances now stared wide-eyed. Students leaned forward, captivated, and in the center of it all, the man they'd mocked 2 days ago, quiet, invisible, unassuming, now stood as the only person who seemed to know exactly what to do. Not just a father, not just a badge, a calm in the middle of a storm no one else knew was coming. The sweep took less than an hour, but what they uncovered in that time would take months to unpack. In the school's underground IT room, buried beneath layers of false privilege and untouchable reputation, federal agents uncovered something that turned the entire situation from disturbing to catastrophic. This wasn't about grades, or transcripts, or even donor records. The breach into Kingsley Prep's servers had been deliberate, specific, surgical. It had accessed only one category of data: student profiles, cross-referenced against parental employment in national security and defense. And Noah Bennett's file was in the center of it, not by accident, by design. Upstairs, in room 204, the lockdown remained. Ms. Langford paced like a ghost, her voice too thin to command order. Parents whispered in urgent tones, and students glanced again and again toward the window, where more black SUVs kept arriving. But Noah sat still. He watched his father. Derek Bennett hadn't spoken in 10 minutes, not since stepping aside with Agent Ramirez to review the decrypted logs. But something in his face had changed. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. "Pull every data point we have," Derek said quietly to the agent beside him. "Every ping, every login, every redirect. I want to know how long they've been watching." The answer came 10 minutes later. 3 weeks, multiple attempts, hidden in the school's wireless systems, silently tracing traffic through the students' iPads, laptops, even the smartboards. And the pattern was clear. 7 students, all from defense-connected families, but only one with a red-level clearance flag attached to his household: Noah. Derek didn't say a word. He simply turned, re-entered the classroom, and knelt beside his son. "We're leaving," he said softly. "But the lockdown—" "I've cleared it," Derek replied. "We're going now." Noah glanced at Ms. Langford, who opened her mouth to object but said nothing. Maybe she saw something in Derek's face. Or maybe she just realized that whatever authority she once held no longer applied to anything that was happening around her. 15 minutes later, they were back in Derek's car. This time, he wasn't driving with his usual patience. This time, he ran the lights. "What's happening?" Noah finally asked, his voice small. Derek didn't lie. He never did. "There are people," he said carefully, "who use schools like yours to get to the people behind them. Through Wi-Fi, through devices, through children." "Me?" Noah asked. His father nodded once. "They were watching you," he said. "Not for what you've done, but because of what I do." The words sat between them like a weight. When they pulled into the driveway, the quiet of their neighborhood felt almost surreal. The house looked exactly the same. So did the porch, the garden, the front door. But Derek didn't go in right away. He opened the garage, pulled out a black duffel, and changed. Not into a different man, just into the version of himself he had tried to keep buried. The one with the sidearm strapped to his waist. The one who answered to no one but his mission. The one who had once dismantled operations like this in cities far less safe than D.C. And now, the threat was on his own front lawn. It began with silence. Then a sound so sharp it sliced through the evening air glass, shattering. By the time Derek Bennett reached the window, it was already too late for calm. The bullet had embedded itself in the kitchen cabinet just inches above where a security agent had been standing moments before. "Sniper, rooftop, east side," came the voice in Derek's earpiece. "We're taking fire." From the shadows surrounding their home, a second team breached through the back door, flashbangs rattling the foundation. The house, a place of peace, of birthday dinners and quiet Sunday mornings, had become a war zone in under 90 seconds. Derek's instincts kicked in. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He ran. Up the stairs, 2 at a time, toward the reinforced panic room tucked behind his home office bookshelf. He had shown it to Noah, once told him it was just for emergencies, the kind of thing he'd hoped his son would never have to use. "Malik," he called out, then stopped himself. No, Noah. This was not some operation overseas. This was his son, in his home. The door to the panic room was sealed shut, just as it should have been, but something felt wrong. He punched in the override code. The door slid open, and the room was empty. Noah's tablet lay face down on the floor. A streak of scuff marked the wall where a chair had been knocked over. And in the center, scrawled in red ink across the steel interior of the vault, "The boy for the files. You have 4 hours." Derek didn't flinch. didn't blink, but something inside him broke quietly. He pulled out his phone and opened a program known only to a handful of people inside the federal network. Noah's watch, the one he'd given him for his 9th birthday, had a hidden tracker embedded behind the glass. A precaution. One Derek had hoped he'd never need. The screen lit up. A blinking green dot, still moving. He tapped twice. Confirmed signal, southeast trajectory. They haven't found the tracker yet. The house around him buzzed with chaos, security agents regrouping, neighbors panicking, local law enforcement now flooding the perimeter, but Derek was already moving. He wasn't just a father anymore. He was a tactical response unit with one singular directive: bring the boy home. 20 minutes later, in an underground garage beneath a federal building no press had ever seen, Derek stood before 3 people he had trusted with his life more than once. Ramirez, former FBI, expert in counter-surveillance. Mason, a sniper who didn't miss. Wells, cyber ops, communications, logistics. No ranks, no titles, just skill. "This is off books," Derek said, sliding a copy of the message across the table. "They took my son. We have a live signal on him. They want a trade." Ramirez narrowed her eyes. "Do you believe they'll honor it?" "No," Derek replied. "I believe they're already planning the extraction. We're not going to wait for the drop." Wells pulled up the tracker feed on a secure tablet. "They're headed toward the outskirts, industrial zone, old warehouse district near Wilmington." Mason nodded, already checking his gear. "Good angles for cover, terrible for backup." Derek holstered his sidearm. "We won't need backup." He looked at each of them in turn. "This isn't a mission." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "This is personal." The warehouse sat like a forgotten skeleton on the edge of Wilmington's industrial zone, its corrugated walls rusted, its windows broken decades ago. To the untrained eye, it was abandoned. To Derek Bennett, it screamed setup. Inside that hollowed structure, his son was a blinking green dot on the tracker, and the beating heart behind every calculated step he was about to take. He stood half-hidden in the shadows, earpiece secured, weapon checked twice. From the rooftop opposite, Mason whispered through the comms. Visual confirmation movement inside. 2 guards at the north entrance. 1 pacing by the loading dock. Can't see the interior. Derek didn't respond. He was already moving. Below him, Agent Ramirez manned the mobile command console, her fingers gliding over controls as she pulled heat signatures from a thermal drone circling above. On screen, a cluster of red bodies glowed, 3 near the entrance, and 1 alone. "Target Alpha is still alive, stationary, 2nd floor," she confirmed. "No signs of distress yet." Inside that warehouse, in a makeshift office framed with fogged plexiglass, Noah Bennett sat with his back against the wall, arms zip-tied, a bruise blooming across his cheekbone. But his eyes wide, sharp, searching, were very much awake. Across from him stood the man in the gray coat. Anton Volk. He wasn't supposed to still exist. But ghosts, Derek once said, don't follow time. They follow memory. And now the ghost from Derek's past had his son. Volk paced slowly, knife twirling between his fingers. "Your father ruined everything," he muttered in a thick accent. "He thinks the past stays buried. He thinks men like me forget." Noah didn't flinch. He remembered what his father taught him in the backyard, not just how to disarm or how to breathe through fear, but something more important. If you're ever cornered, never act like you're scared. Make them think you're stupid, and wait. So Noah leaned back and muttered, "You talk too much." Volk froze. "What?" "I said," Noah repeated louder. "You talk too much. You must be really old if you think that speech is still scary." For a moment, the room was silent. Then the door burst inward. Derek moved like a blade, silent, sudden, precise. 2 steps in, he fired once. A warning shot. It struck the wall near Volk's head, forcing the man to duck behind the desk. Noah hit the ground, instantly rolling away from the line of fire. "Move left," Derek barked, and Noah did, crawling toward cover as Volk popped up and returned fire, wild, desperate, off target. "We have interior breach," Mason confirmed through the comms. "1 hostile, no other movement, you're clear." Volk charged, but Derek was already there, catching the man's wrist mid-swing, twisting sharply, disarming the knife. The 2 men slammed into the wall, years of unfinished reckoning colliding in one brutal sequence. "You don't touch my son," Derek growled, slamming Volk's arm against the window frame, snapping it clean at the elbow. Volk howled, crumpling. Derek didn't hesitate. He pressed his boot against the operative's chest and leveled his weapon. "Your war is over. Volk spat blood but said nothing. Ramirez's voice crackled through. "Reinforcements inbound. You're secure." Derek holstered his weapon and turned to Noah, who was now free of his bindings, chest heaving but standing. "I remembered what you said," Noah whispered. "Distract them, then wait." Derek knelt, pulled his son into a firm, silent embrace, and for the first time in hours, his breath came easy again. Because Noah hadn't just survived, he had fought. The headlines came quickly and stayed vague. Attempted abduction foiled at D.C. Elite school. Pentagon insider's family targeted in sophisticated plot. Sources confirm foreign intelligence connection in security breach. But beyond the flashing chyrons and the speculative headlines, the real story was sealed behind layers of federal clearance and blacked-out documents. The public would never hear the full truth. They wouldn't know about the warehouse, the knife, or the boy who outsmarted a ghost from his father's past, but Kingsley Prep would never forget. By the following Monday, the school's halls were quieter. Not somber, just aware. The kind of awareness that changes how people walk through doorways, how they glance at strangers, how they look at the student they once didn't believe. Noah Bennett arrived through the front gate like he always had, quietly, head slightly lowered, backpack hanging from one shoulder. But something was different now. The whispers weren't mocking, they were reverent. Even Tyler Greaves, the loudest doubter just days before, shifted out of Noah's way in the hallway, not out of fear, but out of recognition, out of respect. News might have been redacted, but rumor has a way of finding clarity where facts cannot. They'd seen the black SUVs, they'd seen the FBI agents, they'd seen Ms. Langford, usually pristine and composed, trembling outside the office after a private meeting with the head of school. And then came the moment that no one expected. Third period, room 204. Noah was at his desk, sketching in the margins of his notebook, when the classroom door opened and Ms. Langford stepped inside, not with her usual self-importance, but slowly, carefully, quietly. She didn't go to her desk. She walked to the front of the room and turned to face the students. "I need to say something," she began. The room fell silent. Her voice didn't tremble, but it didn't carry its usual authority either. It was softer now, stripped of pride, stripped of ego. "I owe one of you a public apology," she continued. "Noah." Every eye turned to him. Ms. Langford took a slow breath. "When you stood here last week and told the truth, I dismissed it. I dismissed you. I made a judgment not based on facts but on assumptions. And that is something I will regret for a long time." Noah didn't speak. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. He just listened because he had learned that sometimes dignity looks like silence. "I hope you'll allow me the chance," she added, "to do better moving forward." Then she turned back to the board and resumed the lesson, her voice quieter but somehow more real than it had ever been. Later that day, Noah found a note in his locker. It wasn't signed. It simply read, "I used to think you were making it all up. I see now you were just braver than the rest of us." And at home, Derek stood beside the window as Noah pulled the curtains closed for the night. "You okay?" he asked. Noah nodded. "They see me now." Derek looked down, one eyebrow raised. "And?" "And I don't care as much as I thought I would," Noah said, a small smile forming. "Because I never needed them to believe me." He looked up at his father. "I just needed to believe in me." And somewhere, deep in Derek's chest, something old, something that had stayed silent through war rooms and wiretaps finally exhaled. 2 weeks later, Noah Bennett stood once again at the front of room 204, the same room where he'd once been laughed at for speaking the truth. But today, no one laughed. The projector behind him glowed with 3 simple words: truth, bias, assumptions. His palms were dry this time, his voice steady, and for the first time since he'd come to Kingsley Prep, he wasn't standing there hoping to be accepted. He was standing because people were ready to listen. "My name is Noah," he began, "and I used to think that truth was enough, that if you said it loud enough or clearly enough, people would believe you." He paused, eyes scanning the room. "But sometimes, truth has to wait until people are ready to see past what they expect." The room was silent. Even Tyler, who sat near the back now, less smug, more thoughtful, kept his eyes locked on Noah, nodding. Beside the window, Ms. Langford stood with her arms crossed but not defensively. It was the posture of someone listening. Someone who had learned the hard way that experience doesn't always look like what we imagine. After the incident, she'd done something unexpected. She signed up for internal training on bias. Then she asked to mentor students from underrepresented backgrounds not as penance, but as commitment. A quiet promise that if her classroom had once been a gate, it could now become a bridge. And Noah was the first to walk across it. After the presentation, students clapped, not out of obligation, but with real, resonant pride. Several parents approached Noah in the hallway afterward. Lawyers, business people, even a diplomat asking if he might share the same talk at the next diversity assembly. Noah smiled politely, but his eyes flicked toward one person standing quietly by the lockers. Julian Ortega, the scholarship kid whose family had been on the brink of eviction after his father lost his job at the manufacturing plant last fall. Noah walked over. "Hey, you free after school?" Julian shrugged. "Yeah? Why?" "Just come by the house. My dad wants to talk to you and your mom." That evening, Derek Bennett made good on something he'd promised himself in the heat of that warehouse, that this fight wasn't just for his son. He sat across the dinner table from Julian's parents, reviewing paperwork, sliding them a contact card for a federal vocational placement program. Within a week, Julian's father was interviewing for a cybersecurity training slot, the very kind of work that had once seemed galaxies away from his reality. "Helping one boy isn't enough," Derek told Ramirez quietly a few days later. "We build legacy by multiplying justice." And back at Kingsley, Noah walked the halls a little taller. Not because he was trying to be someone else, but because he had stopped apologizing for who he already was. He joined the student council. He started a small lunch circle called the Assumption Project, a once-a-week meetup where kids of different backgrounds shared stories that had once been misunderstood, dismissed, or doubted. And when Ethan, a new transfer student from Baltimore, stood up and said, "No one believes me when I say I want to be a pilot," Noah only smiled and replied, "Tell us anyway. This room listens now." Because change didn't come with badges and black SUVs. Sometimes it started in a classroom, with a boy no one believed, and a voice they'd never forget again. 2 months later, the Kingsley Prep gymnasium pulsed with the low hum of proud parents, student laughter, and the unmistakable scent of fresh poster board and ambition. The spring showcase had always been a tradition, a curated stage for the school's brightest to dazzle with science fair models, cultural presentations, and polished smiles. But this year, one project stood apart. Pinned to a simple black backdrop surrounded by nothing flashy was a title written in clean, bold lettering. "Beyond Appearances, Why What You See Isn't Always the Truth." And standing beneath it, wearing a navy blazer that felt just a touch too big, but pride that fit just right, was Noah Bennett. His board was filled with stories, photos, and quotes, but the centerpiece was a question in red ink. What if we listened first, before we decided? People didn't just walk by, they stopped. They read. Some lingered. One father stared at a photo of Derek clipped from a news article with most of the details redacted and asked quietly, "Is this?" "Yes," Noah said. "That's my dad." And just then, Derek Bennett entered the gym, quietly scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on the project and the boy standing next to it. A boy who once stood in a classroom and was called a liar, now a voice people leaned in to hear. Ramirez approached from the back of the gym, holding her phone at her side. "It's official," she told Derek in a low voice. "Network dismantled. All 3 handlers in custody. No trace left." Derek nodded, his eyes never leaving his son. "Good," he said. "But the work's just starting." After the showcase, as the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Noah and Derek walked to the car in silence. The spring air was warm, soft with promise. Halfway to the parking lot, Noah stopped. "Dad?" Derek turned. "Yeah?" "I think I know what I want to do." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Okay, let's hear it." "I want to work in cybersecurity," Noah said. "Not just like coding games or whatever, but real stuff, like what you do." He paused, then added, "I want to protect people who don't even know they need protecting." Derek didn't speak right away. He looked at his son not just as a child, but as someone who'd walked through something no child ever should, and come out with purpose instead of pain. "You're already starting," Derek finally said. "You've made more people see the truth in 2 months than some agents do in a lifetime." Noah smiled, then asked softly, "You think I can really do it?" Derek stepped forward and placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "I know you can. and when the time comes, I'll be right behind you." They stood for a moment under the quiet sky, father and son, both shaped by a war few others had even seen. But what mattered most wasn't what they'd fought off. It was what they were building next. A world where truth stood taller than assumption, where identity wasn't something to prove but something to protect. And in that quiet parking lot, with no headlines, no agents, no redacted reports, a new mission began. They said Noah was making it up. That a child like him couldn't possibly have a father working at the highest levels of national security. That truth only counts when it comes from the right kind of person. But the world doesn't run on appearances. It runs on people who show up when it matters most. Not for recognition, but for what's right. Derek didn't kick down doors for applause. He did it because his son and countless others like him deserve to grow up in a world where being underestimated isn't a daily burden. And Noah? He didn't just survive the silence, he turned it into a microphone. His story reminds us that truth doesn't need permission. It just needs courage. And once it's spoken, it echoes. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of a time you were doubted, leave a comment. Tell us your truth. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Because somewhere out there, another child is being silenced. And your voice might be the reason they speak up.